My name is Anjali Sharma, and I am 34 years old. I live in Fairfield, Connecticut, a quiet town where everything seems perfect on the surface, but underneath it's just like any other place, full of secrets and struggles. I work as an insurance claims adjuster, a job I took because I thought I could help people. I believed in fairness, in doing the right thing, and making sure that when bad things happened, good people weren't left to suffer. That's what drew me to this work. I'm not someone who likes to make a scene or cause trouble. I prefer to keep my head down, do my job well, and go home to my little house with my dog, Max. He's a golden retriever, always happy to see me, always there with a wagging tail no matter how rough my day has been. I've lived here my whole life, and I love the sense of community, the way people look out for each other. Or at least, that's what I used to think. Everything changed after my car accident. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a fender bender on the Merritt Parkway during rush hour. Another driver rear-ended me when I was stopped in traffic. My neck hurt afterward, and my car had some damage, so I filed a claim with my insurance company, State Farm. I'd been with them for years, always paid my premiums on time, and never had any issues. I expected them to handle things fairly, to make things right. But that's not what happened. Instead, they lowballed me on the repair estimate, using what they called comparable vehicles to justify paying less than what my car was worth. At first, I thought it was a mistake, something that could be cleared up with a phone call. I'd been in the industry long enough to know how these things work, or so I thought. I called the adjuster assigned to my case, a guy named Mark, and politely pointed out that the comps they used weren't actually comparable. Different models, different years, even different conditions. He brushed me off, saying it was standard practice, that all companies do it. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, an insider, someone who knew the rules, and even I was getting the runaround. It made me wonder how many other people had been treated this way, people who didn't have my knowledge or my ability to push back. That's when I started to get angry. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about something bigger, something corrupt that needed to be exposed. I decided to dig deeper. I began documenting everything, keeping meticulous records of every interaction, every email, every piece of paper. I didn't make any more phone calls because I wanted a paper trail, something I could use later if I needed to. I requested all the files related to my claim, and what I found shocked me. The comps weren't just slightly off, they were completely fabricated, pulled from thin air to justify paying out less. I knew this was fraud, plain and simple, and I couldn't let it slide. I took my evidence to the Connecticut Insurance Department, the regulator that's supposed to oversee companies like State Farm and protect consumers like me. I met with a regulator named Robert, a stern-looking man who seemed annoyed that I was taking up his time. I laid out everything I had, showing him the fake comps, the discrepancies, the clear evidence of wrongdoing. He barely glanced at it before telling me the same thing Mark had said. All companies do this. He shrugged it off like it was no big deal, like I was making a fuss over nothing. I left his office feeling defeated and furious. How could someone in his position, someone tasked with protecting the public, be so dismissive of blatant fraud? It felt like the system was rigged, designed to protect the powerful at the expense of everyday people. That was the moment I knew I had to do something more, something that would force them to take notice. I couldn't just let this go. I had to fight back, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been cheated by an insurance company. I started researching my options, looking for ways to escalate the situation. I learned about the Arrington method, a strategy developed by someone who had been through a similar ordeal. It involved documenting everything, forcing process by citing statutes and regulations, and going public to create pressure. I decided to adopt it, tailoring it to my own situation. I filed a small claims case against State Farm, paying the $135 filing fee myself. It felt like a long shot, but I had to try. The court process was slow and frustrating, filled with delays and obstacles. State Farm's lawyers tried to dismiss the case, arguing that it was frivolous, but I fought back, citing their own rules and the evidence I had collected. Meanwhile, I started writing about my experience online, sharing my story on forums and social media. To my surprise, it resonated with people. My posts got thousands of views, hundreds of comments, and shares from others who had faced similar issues. The public attention put pressure on the insurance department, and suddenly, they seemed more interested in my case. But just as things were starting to look up, I hit a major setback. The regulator, Robert, managed to get my case sealed, effectively burying the evidence and stopping the judicial review in its tracks. It happened in 30 seconds during a hearing, a quick motion that I wasn't prepared for. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. All that work, all that evidence, suddenly locked away where no one could see it. I was back to square one, but worse, because now I knew how far they would go to protect themselves. I spent nights lying awake, wondering if I had made a huge mistake, if I was just a small person trying to fight a giant machine that would always win. Max would curl up next to me, sensing my stress, but even his comforting presence wasn't enough to shake the feeling of hopelessness. I had come so far, only to be knocked down again. It seemed like all was lost, that I would never get justice, and that the corruption would continue unchecked. But I refused to give up. I remembered why I started this fight, not just for me, but for all the people who didn't have a voice. I doubled down on my efforts, reaching out to journalists, lawmakers, anyone who would listen. I compiled all my evidence into a detailed report and sent it to the Department of Justice, hoping they would take an interest. Weeks went by with no response, and I started to lose hope again. Then, one afternoon, I got an email from a DOJ investigator. They had received my materials and were opening a formal inquiry into the Connecticut Insurance Department's practices. My heart raced as I read the words. It was the breakthrough I had been waiting for. The public pressure from my online posts had grown, with over 1 million people reading about my story, and it created a scandal that the regulators couldn't ignore. I knew this was my chance to push harder, to make sure something actually changed. I prepared for a final confrontation, gathering every piece of evidence, every email, every document, and I requested a meeting with Robert and his superiors. I walked into that room with my head held high, ready to face them down. I laid out everything, pointing out their noncompliance, their dismissive attitude, and the harm they were causing to consumers. Robert tried to brush me off again, but this time I wasn't alone. The DOJ was involved, and the public was watching. I demanded accountability, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. The state announced a $471,000 investigation into the misuse of the fraud fund, the very fund meant to protect people from fraud being misused by the regulators themselves. It was a poetic justice, a consequence they never saw coming. I had risked everything, and it had paid off. In the end, I didn't just win my case, I started a movement. The Arrington method became a model for others to fight back against corruption, and I felt a sense of fulfillment I had never known. My life returned to a new normal. I still live in Fairfield with Max, but now I'm known as someone who stood up to the system and won. People stop me on the street to thank me, to share their own stories, and it feels good to know I made a difference. But the best part came just a few weeks ago when I received a letter in the mail. It was from the court, unsealing my case and approving a full judicial review of State Farm's practices. As I read it, I couldn't help but smile, thinking about how far I'd come from that first frustrating phone call. And then, as I was putting the letter away, I noticed a small footnote I had missed before. The investigation had uncovered that Robert, the regulator who shrugged me off, had been taking kickbacks from insurance companies for years. He was facing criminal charges, and the system he protected was finally being held accountable. It was the perfect twist, the parting thrill that sealed my revenge. I looked at Max, who wagged his tail like he understood, and I knew that sometimes doing the right thing is its own reward, but it doesn't hurt when justice is served cold.